In September 2024, Estate Attorney Jennifer Hayes was overseeing the liquidation of the Blackwood family mansion in Salem, Massachusetts, following the death of the last surviving heir. The imposing Victorian home had been in the family for over a century, its rooms filled with generations of accumulated possessions that told the story of one of New England's most prominent families. While cataloging items for auction, Hayes discovered a collection of family photographs in the mansion's library, carefully preserved in leather albums and wooden boxes. Most depicted the typical formal portraits of wealthy American families from the early 1900s. Stern patriarchs, elegantly dressed matrons, and children posed with the rigid formality expected of the era. However, one particular photograph immediately stood out from the rest. Unlike the other stiff ceremonial portraits, this image captured what appeared to be a moment of genuine family joy. The photograph, professionally mounted and bearing the embossed mark Whitman Photography Studio, Boston, Massachusetts, 1903, showed the complete Blackwood family gathered in their home's ornate parlor. The scene depicted a prosperous American family at the height of the country's industrial prosperity. Parents, Charles and Margaret Blackwood, sat in elaborate chairs, surrounded by their 4 children ranging in age from approximately 6 to 16 years old. The family's clothing reflected their wealth. Silk dresses, tailored suits, and expensive jewelry that marked them as members of Boston's social elite. What made this portrait unusual was its warmth. Unlike the typical stern formality of 1903 photography, most family members were smiling or appeared relaxed. Margaret Blackwood's hand rested lovingly on her husband's shoulder, while the older children displayed genuine expressions of contentment and affection. But as Hayes examined the photograph more closely, she noticed something deeply troubling about the youngest child, a boy of perhaps 6 years old standing at his mother's side. While his family radiated happiness and prosperity, the child's expression was so disturbing that Hayes found herself unable to look away. The boy's face would soon become the center of an investigation that would uncover one of the most shocking family secrets in New England history: estate. Attorney Hayes couldn't shake her unease about the young boy's expression in the 1903 family portrait. While his parents and siblings displayed the contentment of a prosperous family, the child's face told a completely different story. His eyes held a depth of fear and desperation that seemed impossible for someone so young, as if he were silently screaming for help while surrounded by apparent family harmony. Hayes contacted Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist who specialized in analyzing historical photographs for legal cases involving family disputes and inheritance claims. Rodriguez had developed techniques for reading body language and facial expressions in vintage photographs, often uncovering hidden family dynamics that weren't immediately apparent. Dr. Rodriguez's initial analysis was deeply unsettling. "This child is displaying classic signs of severe psychological trauma," he reported. "The contrast between his expression and the rest of the family is stark. Look at his posture. He's positioned as far from the adults as possible while still being in the photograph. His hands are clenched, his shoulders are raised defensively, and his eyes show what I can only describe as terror." The psychological evaluation revealed additional disturbing details. While the other family members looked directly at the camera or at each other, the boy's gaze was fixed on something outside the frame, something that clearly filled him with dread. His mouth was slightly open as if caught mid-scream. Though the formal portrait setting would have required silence, most troubling was what Rodriguez identified as dissociative behavior in the child's expression. "He appears to be mentally retreating from his surroundings," Rodriguez explained. "This is a common response in children experiencing ongoing trauma. He's physically present for the photograph, but psychologically, he's trying to escape." Hayes decided to research the Blackwood family history, beginning with public records from 1903. Salem. What she discovered painted a picture of a family that had successfully maintained a facade of respectability while hiding dark secrets that had remained buried. For over 120 years, the investigation would soon reveal that the young boy's terrified expression had captured a moment of silent desperation that would finally, more than a century later, expose the truth about what had been happening behind the closed doors of one of Salem's most respected families. The child's face in that 1903 photograph was about to speak for victims who had been silenced for generations. Hayes' research into the Blackwood family revealed a lineage that had been prominent in Salem society for generations. Charles Blackwood had inherited a prosperous textile manufacturing business from his father, employing hundreds of workers in mills throughout Massachusetts. The family lived in one of Salem's grandest homes and was actively involved in local charities, church activities, and civic organizations. Contemporary newspaper accounts from 1903 painted the Blackwoods as pillars of the community. Charles served on the city council and had donated generously to local orphanages and schools. Margaret Blackwood was president of the Salem Ladies Charitable Society and was frequently mentioned in society pages for hosting elaborate fundraising events for various causes. However, Hayes noticed troubling gaps in the public record regarding the family's youngest child. Identified in family documents as Timothy Blackwood, born in 1897, while his three older siblings, Charles Jr., Elizabeth, and Margaret, were frequently mentioned in social announcements, school records, and family correspondence. Timothy appeared to be virtually invisible in the family's public life. Hayes consulted with Dr. Amanda Chen, a historian specializing in New England family genealogy, to help trace the Blackwood children's lives. Chen's research revealed that while the three older children had attended prestigious private schools, participated in social events, and eventually married into other prominent families, Timothy's educational and social records were mysteriously sparse. It's as if the family wanted to keep Timothy hidden from public view, Chen observed. The other children have extensive documentation of their activities and achievements, but Timothy barely exists in the official record after 1905. More disturbing was the discovery that Timothy Blackwood had died in 1908 at the age of 11, according to death records filed with the state. The cause of death was listed simply as illness, with no additional medical details provided. The death certificate was signed by a family doctor who had no other recorded patients in the Salem area, suggesting he might have been brought in specifically to handle Timothy's case. Hayes also found that Timothy's funeral had been private, with no newspaper obituary or public acknowledgement of his death, highly unusual for a child from such a prominent family. The only record of his burial was a simple headstone in the family plot at Salem's Greenlawn Cemetery, positioned slightly apart from the other family graves. The investigation was beginning to suggest that Timothy Blackwood's terrified expression in the 1903 photograph had captured something far more sinister than typical childhood unhappiness. Hayes' investigation took a significant turn when she discovered that some of Salem's oldest medical practices still maintained historical records dating back to the early 1900s. Dr. Patricia Walsh, current owner of what had been Salem General Medical Practice in 1903, granted Hayes access to archived patient files that had been stored in the practice's basement for over a century. Among the yellowed medical records, Hayes found a file marked T. Blackwood, Confidential, Family Account. The file contained disturbing documentation of repeated medical visits between 1901 and 1905, describing injuries and symptoms that painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse. The medical records, written in the careful handwriting of Dr. Edmund Foster, documented a pattern of injuries consistent with physical violence, broken ribs, bruises in various stages of healing, malnutrition, and what Dr. Foster euphemistically described as nervous disorders that would today be recognized as symptoms of severe psychological trauma. Most damning was a series of notes indicating that Dr. Foster had become increasingly concerned about Timothy's condition. One entry from March 1904 read, "Young Timothy presents with fresh contusions on his back and arms. Family claims child is accident-prone, but pattern of injuries suggests deliberate infliction. Child exhibits extreme fear when adults approach and flinches at sudden movements." The medical file also contained correspondence between Dr. Foster and other physicians, seeking advice on how to handle his suspicions about the family. In a letter to a colleague in Boston, Dr. Foster wrote, "I am faced with a moral dilemma regarding the Blackwood child. The evidence of abuse is clear, yet the family's prominence in Salem society makes accusations dangerous to my practice and reputation." Hayes discovered that Dr. Foster had attempted to document Timothy's condition through detailed sketches and photographs of his injuries, apparently building a case for potential legal action. However, these records abruptly stopped in late 1905, suggesting that the family had either intimidated Dr. Foster into silence or had found a more compliant physician. The medical records also revealed that Timothy had been kept isolated from other children, with the family claiming he suffered from a contagious condition that required him to remain at home. This explained why Timothy rarely appeared. In public records, he had been essentially imprisoned. In his own home, while his family maintained their respectable facade, the 1903 photograph now took on even more sinister significance, capturing perhaps the only visual evidence of Timothy's desperate situation that had survived more than a century. Hayes' investigation led her to examine employment records from the Blackwood household, hoping to find servants or staff members who might have witnessed Timothy's treatment. Through Salem's Historical Employment Agency records, she identified several domestic workers who had been employed by the family during the early 1900s. Most remarkably, Hayes discovered that one former servant, Mary O'Sullivan, had written a detailed account of her experiences in the Blackwood household. O'Sullivan's memoir, titled Serving the Rich, A Domestic's Truth, had been published privately in 1945, but had received little attention at the time. Hayes located a copy in the Salem Historical Society's archives. O'Sullivan's memoir contained a chapter specifically about her employment with the Blackwoods from 1902 to 1905, which she described as the most disturbing period of her 40-year career in domestic service. Her account provided chilling details about Timothy's treatment that corroborated the medical records Hayes had discovered. Young Master Timothy was treated more like a prisoner than a child, O'Sullivan wrote. He was confined to a small room in the mansion's third floor and was rarely allowed to interact with his siblings or participate in family activities. His meals were brought to his room, and he was forbidden from leaving the house. O'Sullivan's memoir revealed that Charles Blackwood had justified Timothy's isolation by claiming the boy was mentally defective and dangerous to himself and others. However, O'Sullivan observed that Timothy was actually an intelligent, sensitive child whose only crime was questioning his father's increasingly violent discipline. The memoir described witnessing multiple incidents of abuse, including Charles Blackwood beating Timothy with a leather strap for minor infractions and forcing the child to remain silent during family social gatherings. And the family would entertain guests in the parlor below while Master Timothy remained locked upstairs, forbidden to make any sound that might disturb the elegant conversations. Most disturbing was O'Sullivan's account of the 1903 family photograph session. She wrote, "The photographer insisted on including all the children in the portrait, despite Mr. Blackwood's initial reluctance. Young Timothy was brought down from his room, clearly terrified and barely able to stand still for the photograph. The poor child's expression showed his desperate wish to escape, but he dared not move or speak." O'Sullivan explained that she had eventually left the Blackwood household because she could no longer witness Timothy's suffering in silence. Her memoir included a haunting passage. "I failed that innocent child by not finding the courage to speak out. His eyes in that family photograph still haunt my dreams." The servant's testimony confirmed that the 1903 photograph had indeed captured a moment of genuine terror in Timothy's young life. Hayes's investigation deepened when she discovered correspondence between Margaret Blackwood and her sister, Eleanor Whitman, who lived in New York City. The letters, found in Eleanor's estate papers housed at the New York Historical Society, provided an insider's perspective on the family's treatment of Timothy and revealed the twisted logic behind the abuse. The correspondence, spanning from 1902 to 1906, showed that Margaret Blackwood had confided in her sister about the family's problem with Timothy. The letters revealed that Charles Blackwood had become convinced that Timothy was not his biological child, suspecting Margaret of infidelity during the early years of their marriage. In a letter dated January 1903, Margaret wrote to Eleanor, "Charles's suspicions about Timothy have grown into an obsession. He claims the boy doesn't resemble our family and insists on treating him as an unwanted burden rather than our son. I fear for Timothy's safety, but Charles forbids me from interfering with his discipline." The correspondence revealed that Charles Blackwood had developed increasingly elaborate justifications for Timothy's abuse. He claimed the boy needed firm correction to overcome his defective character, and argued that isolating Timothy was necessary to prevent him from contaminating his siblings with his supposed moral and intellectual deficiencies. Eleanor's responses to Margaret's letters showed that the extended family was aware of Timothy's mistreatment but felt powerless to intervene. In one letter, Eleanor wrote, "You must find the strength to protect your son, Margaret. Charles' behavior toward the child is beyond cruel. It is criminal. No child deserves such treatment, regardless of parentage." However, Margaret's letters revealed her own tragic complicity in Timothy's abuse. Despite her apparent concern, she consistently chose to prioritize her marriage and social position over her child's welfare. In a particularly heartbreaking passage, she wrote, "I know I should do more to protect Timothy, but Charles threatens to expose what he calls my adultery if I interfere. The scandal would destroy our family's reputation and leave all of us destitute." The letters also documented Charles Blackwood's efforts to find an institution where Timothy could be permanently confined, away from Salem society. Margaret wrote, "Charles has been investigating facilities for difficult children in remote locations. He speaks of sending Timothy away permanently, claiming it would be better for everyone, especially Timothy himself." The correspondence painted a picture of a family conspiracy of silence, with even Timothy's mother choosing social respectability over her child's basic human rights. Following the trail of Charles Blackwood's attempts to institutionalize Timothy, Hayes contacted Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a researcher specializing in the history of American mental health facilities. Mitchell's expertise in early 20th century institutional records helped Hayes uncover the disturbing truth about Timothy's final years. Through state archives and medical institution records, Mitchell discovered that Charles Blackwood had indeed succeeded in having Timothy committed to the Riverside State Hospital for mental defectives in western Massachusetts in late 1905. The commitment papers, signed by a compliant physician and approved by a corrupt magistrate, falsely described Timothy as violently insane and dangerous to family members. The hospital's admission records, preserved in the Massachusetts State Archives, revealed that 8-year-old Timothy had been essentially purchased into captivity through generous donations Charles Blackwood made to the facility. The boy was listed under an assumed name, Thomas Brown, to prevent any connection to the prominent Blackwood family. Dr. Mitchell's research into Riverside State Hospital revealed it to be one of the era's most notorious institutions, where unwanted children from wealthy families were hidden away from public view. The facility operated more like a prison than a hospital, with minimal medical care and harsh conditions designed to discourage families from ever retrieving their confined relatives. Medical records from Riverside show that Timothy, listed as Thomas Brown, had been a model. Patient who displayed no signs of mental illness or violent behavior. Staff notes consistently described him as quiet, cooperative, and unusually intelligent for his supposed condition. These observations contradicted every claim Charles Blackwood had made to justify the commitment. The institutional records also revealed that Timothy had never received visitors during his 3 years at Riverside. While other patients occasionally saw family members, Timothy remained completely isolated, apparently abandoned by everyone who had once claimed to love him. Most tragically, Hayes discovered that Timothy had died at Riverside in January 1908. Not from illness, as his official death certificate claimed, but from pneumonia contracted in the facility's unheated dormitories during a particularly harsh winter. He was 11 years old and had spent nearly a quarter of his brief life locked away from the world. The hospital's burial records showed that Timothy had been interred in the institution's unmarked paupers cemetery, not in the Blackwood family plot, as Hayes had initially believed. The headstone she had found in Salem's Green Lawn Cemetery was apparently a false memorial, created to maintain the family's deception. The 1903 photograph now represented the last known image of Timothy during his brief period of freedom, capturing his desperate awareness that his family was preparing to dispose of him permanently. Hayes's investigation revealed the sophisticated nature of the Blackwood family's cover-up, which had successfully hidden Timothy's fate for over 120 years. The family had constructed an elaborate web of lies, false documents, and purchased silence that had protected their reputation while erasing Timothy's existence from Salem's historical record. Working with document examiner Dr. Lisa Chen, Hayes discovered that several key records related to Timothy had been deliberately falsified. The death certificate claiming Timothy died at home in 1908 was a forgery, created using stolen official letterhead and signed by a physician who had already died in 1907. Similarly, the burial records for Salem's Green Lawn Cemetery had been altered to include Timothy's name, though his body had never actually been interred there. The investigation uncovered evidence that Charles Blackwood had paid substantial bribes to ensure his son's disappearance remained secret. Bank records from the period showed large cash withdrawals coinciding with Timothy's commitment to Riverside, suggesting payments to hospital administrators, legal officials, and potentially even Timothy's treating physicians. Hayes also discovered that the Blackwood family had systematically destroyed or altered other evidence of Timothy's existence. Family photographs from the 1902-1905 period had been carefully edited to remove Timothy's presence, with professional retouching that was remarkably sophisticated for the era. Only the 1903 portrait had survived unaltered, apparently because Charles Blackwood had been satisfied that Timothy's terrified expression supported his claims about the boy's mental instability. The cover-up extended beyond the immediate family. Hayes found evidence that several prominent Salem citizens had been aware of Timothy's fate, but had chosen to remain silent in exchange for continued business relationships with Charles Blackwood, or to protect their own involvement in similar family scandals. Dr. Mitchell's research revealed that Riverside State Hospital had been complicit in numerous similar cases, accepting difficult children from wealthy families who paid handsomely for permanent disposal of inconvenient relatives. The institution's records showed dozens of children committed under false pretenses and never seen again by their families. Most disturbing was the discovery that Margaret Blackwood had visited Timothy secretly at Riverside just once. In December 1907, shortly before his death, hospital visitor logs showed that she had signed in as Mrs. Brown and had spent only 30 minutes with her dying son. A brief note in Timothy's medical file indicated that he had been agitated after the visit and had repeatedly asked staff when his mama would return to take him home. The investigation had uncovered not just one family's crime, but an entire system designed to help wealthy families eliminate unwanted children while maintaining their social respectability. The revelation of Timothy Blackwood's tragic fate sent shockwaves through Salem's historical and legal communities. Hayes's documentation provided irrefutable evidence of child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and systematic cover-up that had allowed the Blackwood family to maintain their respectable reputation while destroying an innocent child's life. Dr. Rodriguez's psychological analysis of the case concluded that Timothy had been the victim of what would today be recognized as severe child abuse, including physical violence, emotional torture, and deliberate isolation designed to break his spirit. This child endured treatment that would be considered criminal by any standard, Rodriguez reported. The 1903 photograph captured his silent plea for help that went unanswered for over a century. The Massachusetts State Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into the historical crimes, though obviously no criminal prosecution was possible, given that all parties had been dead for decades. However, the investigation served an important purpose in officially documenting the truth about Timothy's fate and clearing his memory of the false claims of mental illness that had justified his abuse. The investigation also prompted a broader examination of Riverside State Hospital's practices during the early 1900s. Researchers discovered that dozens of children had been wrongfully committed to the facility by families seeking to dispose of unwanted relatives. Many of these children, like Timothy, had died in the institution's harsh conditions and been buried in unmarked graves. Hayes worked with genealogical researchers to identify living descendants of other children who had been disappeared into Riverside and similar institutions. The discovery sparked a movement to create memorials for these forgotten victims and to acknowledge their suffering after more than a century of silence. The Salem Historical Society created a permanent exhibit about Timothy Blackwood's case, featuring the 1903 photograph, alongside documentation of his tragic fate. The exhibit served as a powerful reminder about the vulnerability of children and the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Most significantly, Timothy's story influenced contemporary discussions about child protection and the responsibility of institutions to investigate suspicions of abuse. Modern child welfare advocates cited his case as evidence that systems designed to protect children must prioritize the child's welfare over family privacy or institutional convenience. The 1903 photograph that had seemed to show a happy family gathering was now understood as one of the most powerful pieces of evidence ever discovered about historical child abuse, with Timothy's expression serving as eternal testimony to his suffering. 2 years after Hayes first noticed Timothy Blackwood's haunting expression in the 1903 family photograph, the impact of his story continued to resonate throughout Salem and beyond. What had begun as a routine estate liquidation had evolved into one of the most significant historical child welfare cases ever documented, giving voice to a victim who had been silenced for over 120 years. The Timothy Blackwood Foundation, established by Hayes and supported by child welfare organizations nationwide, began working to identify and memorialize other children who had suffered similar fates during the early 1900s. The foundation's researchers discovered that Timothy's case was tragically common among wealthy families of the era, who routinely disposed of inconvenient children through institutionalization or worse. Salem's mayor issued a formal proclamation acknowledging Timothy's suffering and apologizing for the city's failure to protect him. The proclamation read, "Timothy Blackwood was failed by every institution that should have protected him, his family, his community, and his government. We cannot undo the terrible injustice he suffered, but we can ensure his story serves as a permanent reminder of our responsibility to protect all children." The original Blackwood Mansion was converted into a center for child advocacy services, with Timothy's former third-floor prison transformed into a memorial room where visitors could learn about his story and the broader history of child abuse in affluent families. The room featured the 1903 photograph prominently, with Timothy's terrified expression serving as a powerful call to action. Dr. Rodriguez's analysis of Timothy's case became required reading in child psychology programs nationwide, helping train new generations of professionals to recognize signs of abuse that might otherwise be overlooked. Timothy's expression in that photograph contains everything we need to know about recognizing a child in desperate need of help, Rodriguez explained. He's been teaching us for over a century. We just needed to learn how to listen. Hayes reflected on the profound impact of her discovery. When I first saw that photograph, I was simply cataloging estate items. I never imagined that one child's expression could reveal such a powerful story about justice, courage, and the importance of speaking for those who cannot speak for themselves. The Riverside State Hospital site was converted into a memorial park, with a monument listing the names of all children who had died there, including Timothy Blackwood's real name prominently displayed. The memorial's inscription read, "In memory of the children whose voices were silenced, whose stories were buried, and whose suffering was ignored. May their memory inspire us to protect all children." Timothy's story had transformed from a family's dark secret into a beacon for child protection advocates, proving that truth, however long buried, eventually finds its way to light. The 1903 photograph that had captured his moment of terror now served as eternal testimony that every child's voice matters and that justice, though delayed, can still be served.